In 1998, an entire class of 18 children and their teacher disappeared during a routine field trip in the Colorado wilderness, leaving nothing but an abandoned bus and unanswered questions. For 2 years, no trace of them was ever found. But now, a grieving father stumbles upon a long-forgotten photograph, uncovering a secret that was never meant to come to light. Colorado, late September 1998. The air was unusually cold, with thick fog shrouding the pine ridges, obscuring the view along the winding mountain roads. In the town of Grayson, a place so peaceful it seemed as if time had fallen asleep. An event occurred, shattering the slow, quiet rhythm into fragments of chaos that could never be reassembled. That Friday morning, 18 fifth graders from Red Meadow Elementary School and their homeroom teacher, Mr. Colton Reed, set off on a field trip to the Western National Park. A temporary substitute driver, Hank Ramirez, was also aboard the old yellow school bus, which had just been serviced a few days prior. Parents bid farewell to their children with quick hugs and familiar reminders. Remember to wear your hat. Did you bring your sandwich? Listen to Mr. Reed, okay? No one knew it would be the last time they saw their children. The school bus departed from the school at 8:13 a.m. It never arrived at its destination. At first, the school assumed the bus was delayed by traffic or mechanical trouble, but by early afternoon, there were no calls, no contact from the teacher, the driver, or any pit stop. Parents began calling in. Worry slowly turned into panic. By 4 p.m., the school declared an emergency. Local police became involved. By the following morning, the search team discovered the abandoned bus on a dangerous curve along a mountain road. The bus door was closed. The engine was cold. There was no one inside. No signs of a struggle. No traces of blood. Only deep tire marks on the ground, indicating the bus had braked suddenly before stopping. The chilling detail was that the bus stopped just at the edge of a cliff, as if it had come to a halt only a few centimeters away from tragedy. The county police department organized a large-scale search operation. Helicopters, sniffer dogs, hundreds of volunteers combed through the forests, rocky streams, and caves. But there was no trace, no dropped belongings, no scraps of fabric. No one. The community was shocked, mourning, and eventually exhausted. After 3 months of fruitless investigation, the case was categorized as a disappearance with no clear explanation. A year later, all investigations were halted due to lack of tangible evidence. The remaining families demanded lawsuits against the school, the police, even the state government. But nothing could change the reality. 18 children and 1 adult had vanished from the world without leaving a trace. Martin Kessler was one of the few who did not give up. He was the father of Elias Kessler, a 10-year-old boy who loved dinosaurs and dreamed of becoming an archaeologist. Before the tragedy, Martin had been a successful, solid, and principled construction engineer. Afterward, he was nothing but a shadow. His wife, Ruth, a middle school literature teacher, completely collapsed after losing their son. She quietly fell into depression, writing hundreds of pages of diary entries filled with self-blame and whispered messages to Elias. 6 years after the incident, Ruth swallowed an entire bottle of sleeping pills and left the world with a parting note. Keep going if you can. Martin never left. He froze time in their old house. Elias's room remained untouched, the bedspread printed with T-Rex, the bookshelf filled with dinosaur models, the world map with red pins marking the places his son had dreamed of visiting. The photo of Elias dressed as Indiana Jones for Halloween still hung above his desk, Not a day passed that Martin didn't step into that room, even if only for a few seconds. He never acknowledged that his son was dead. He never held a funeral. He kept Elias's old phone number, sometimes sending short messages. "Dad's still here. Mom misses you. If you're still alive, please give us a sign." No reply ever came. But inside Martin, something had never extinguished. It wasn't hope, but an obsession, a fragmented memory he had never managed to piece back together. A question gnawed at him like acid. What really happened? 22 years had passed. In late November 2020, a cold wind swept through Grayson, bringing an early winter. Martin, in an effort to clear out the dusty attic to repair a leaking roof, discovered a box he had long forgotten. The box was wrapped in old newspaper, its label on the lid yellowed with age. Elias, grade 3. Inside were small fragments of memory, hand-drawn pictures, a student ID, a few test papers, birthday cards, and a Polaroid photo he had never seen before. Martin froze in place. The photo captured the children gathering in front of the school bus on that fateful morning. Elias stood in the middle, wearing a green hoodie with a T-Rex on it, his favorite. The children were all smiling, unaware that it would be the last morning of their lives. But what sent a chill down Martin's spine was the background, to the right of the image. A man. His face was unclear, just a shadowy figure standing apart from the group of children near the bus door. He wore a baseball cap, hands in his jacket pockets, standing still as if observing from afar. Martin couldn't recall anyone who had been there. The reports only mentioned Mr. Reed, the main driver, and the substitute, Hank Ramirez. This man wasn't in any official images. His name didn't appear on any staff lists. Who was this man? Why was he near the bus but never mentioned in any witness statements? He spent the entire night scanning the photo into his computer, adjusting brightness and contrast. The result was no clearer, but the more he looked, the more uneasy Martin felt. Over the course of 22 years, he had reread the investigation reports hundreds of times, cross-referenced witness statements, collected articles, and saved every line of news from the internet. There was no mention of this man, not a single mention of a fourth person at the scene. Martin sat in the dark, clutching the photo, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. After 15 years of helplessness, for the first time, he saw a crack in the wall of silence surrounding the disappearance. He needed someone who could dig deeper, someone who wasn't afraid of the dark and was used to living in it. He remembered a name he had once seen in an article about missing children cases. Ruby Morales. Ruby Morales was once a renowned investigative journalist, known for her articles on human trafficking, missing children, and cases covered up by authorities. She left journalism after receiving threats for exposing a corruption scandal involving a major charity organization. Now, she lived modestly in a small apartment above a bakery in Boulder, still researching cases no one else wanted to touch. Martin came to meet her, bringing the photograph and a thick folder of documents he had collected over more than a decade. When she opened the door, Ruby looked him up and down. "Martin Kessler?" "Yes." "You look like you just crawled out from under a grave." "Feels about the same." He handed her the photo. Ruby held it, examining it closely, remaining silent for longer than anyone had ever stared at that photo. "This man," she pointed to the shadowy figure in the background. "Do you know who he is?" "No. I think he was the last person photographed near Elias before he disappeared." She looked at him, tilting her head. Are you ready to hear things you don't want to hear? I've heard enough nonsense. I want the truth, even if it tears me apart. They sat together for 4 hours. Ruby traced school bus records, driver hire contracts, and found a notable name, Hank Ramirez. He was the assistant driver hired 3 days before the trip. According to police reports, he left after the incident, but there was no further information. There's no termination record, no permanent address. No one knows where he went afterward, Ruby said, flipping through the pages. Martin, this name isn't just blurry in the photo. He's been erased from the records, intentionally. Martin felt a cold chill down his spine. They had a name, but they were still far from the truth. Colorado stepped into winter with sharp, skin-cutting winds and thick fog shrouding every narrow, winding road. In a small apartment above an old bakery, Ruby Morales huddled over her cluttered desk, surrounded by stacks of dusty documents that formed a makeshift wall shielding her from the outside world. The faint blue glow from her computer screen reflected on her weary face. Yet within her eyes burned a flicker of determination that could not be extinguished. On the wall, Ruby had pinned a large map filled with sticky notes, relationship diagrams, and red strings connecting names and companies like a tangled web. In the center of the map, 2 names were boldly circled with a thick black marker: Trans Mountain Logistics and Kevin Marshall, the sheriff's younger brother. Every red thread was a connection, a puzzle piece in the grotesque picture Ruby was determined to assemble. She clicked her mouse, opening a financial file she had discreetly extracted from public databases. Her eyes scanned the lines of reports, dry numbers, soulless dates, and detached financial entries. Suddenly, a line of data made her heart skip a beat, the pulse quickening. A large cash transfer to a trust fund in Mexico. The beneficiary, A. Whitman. Ruby's breath caught. She hastily entered another query, hoping for more data. But the following lines disappeared as if wiped clean. The screen flickered, then displayed a chilling message. 403. Access denied. Ruby frowned, exhaled sharply, leaned back in her chair, her expression revealing growing tension. In that moment, she knew she had just touched a secret that many powerful people preferred to keep buried. A sharp knock at the door shattered the tense atmosphere of the small room. Ruby sprang up, quickly concealed the file under the papers on her desk, and hurried to open the door. Standing there was Martin Kessler, his face gaunt, eyes deep and hollow from sleepless nights. Without saying a word, he silently handed her the old photo of Elias, the picture that had become the symbol of both an unending pain and an unyielding hope. "Any news?" Martin asked, his voice rough from exhaustion. Ruby invited him in, pointing to the computer screen, its soft blue light casting shadows across their weary faces. Trans Mountain Logistics, run by Kevin Marshall, the sheriff's younger brother. They held transportation contracts with Red Meadow Elementary since 1996. But after the disappearance, the company made multiple suspicious cash withdrawals, which were then transferred into a trust fund in Mexico. The beneficiary's name is A. Whitman. Martin frowned, his gaze as sharp as a blade. A. Whitman? Who is that? I'm tracking it down. The files are nearly wiped clean. But I've got a hacker friend helping. If we're lucky, we'll know more in a few days. Martin stared at Elias's photo, searching for a trace of comfort in the boy's innocent smile. Maybe this person knows what really happened to the class. To Elias. Ruby nodded, her voice soft but resolute. I got an anonymous call last night, threatening that if I don't stop, I'll have an accident. Someone's very scared of what we're about to uncover." Martin clenched his fists, his voice trembling yet resolute. "We can't stop. Not now. Not after 22 years. Ruby allowed herself a tired but defiant smile. "And I have no intention of stopping." The sharp ring of the landline phone pierced the room's silence. Ruby picked up the receiver, her lips tight, silent. On the other end, a deep, threatening voice spoke. "Ms. Morales, stop before it's too late. Both you and Kessler will disappear, just like the other children." Ruby gripped the phone tightly, her eyes hard as steel. She didn't reply, simply hung up and turned to Martin, her gaze burning with fierce determination. "We need to move fast. Someone's panicking over what we're about to find." They sat in silence in the small room, the faint blue light from the screen illuminating the weariness etched on their faces. Outside the window, the first snowflakes of the season drifted down, a gentle reminder that time waits for no one. "You know," Ruby whispered, her voice hoarse with exhaustion, "many cases I've chased started with something small, seemingly harmless. But as I dug deeper, I always found something more terrifying. People with money, power, and no hesitation to erase anyone who stood in their way." Martin clenched his fists, picturing Elias's face, the boy's bright smile, his eyes shining beneath a blue woolen hat. He remembered that last morning, Elias running toward the bus with innocent excitement. "I can't give up," he said, his voice deep and steady. "Elias and the other children deserve the truth." Ruby turned back to the computer screen, her eyes meticulously scanning every remaining trace the hacker had unlocked. "A. Whitman, last known address in Grayson," she murmured. "But the records disappeared in '99. That was when the case went cold." Martin's brow furrowed. "Do you think this person is the living witness?" Ruby met his gaze, her eyes flashing with a mix of hope and concern. "It's possible. If we find A. Whitman, we'll finally complete the missing puzzle." Ruby's phone vibrated, displaying a message from the hacker. "Confirmed. A. Whitman is Anna Whitman, previously living in Grayson, now hiding near the Mexico border." Martin read it, his heart pounding. Ruby's frown deepened, her voice low but determined. "We're getting close to the truth, but it won't be easy. Someone's been trying to erase her traces for 22 years. Martin nodded, his eyes blazing with unwavering resolve. "We'll find her, no matter what." That night, as the heavy veil of night draped itself over the quiet town of Grayson, Martin and Ruby embarked on their perilous journey. They drove under a drizzle so fine it seemed to weave a shimmering lace across the windshield, while the streetlights cast shimmering pools of light on the slick asphalt. Inside the car, a heavy silence enveloped them. The rhythmic beat of the windshield wipers was the only sound accompanying the tension in their breaths. "Are you sure about this?" Ruby's voice broke the stillness, her eyes flicking toward Martin, who sat rigidly in the passenger seat, his face illuminated faintly by the muted glow of the dashboard. "I'm sure," Martin replied with a firmness that surprised even himself. His voice was steady, a quiet but unyielding resolve ringing through each word. "We have to break into the Trans Mountain Logistics office. We need to get the evidence before they cover their tracks." Ruby nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line, her hands tightening on the steering wheel. "All right, I brought the lock-picking kit. Let's be smart about this. We can't afford to slip up now." They pulled into a dimly lit parking lot, a block away from the Trans Mountain Logistics building. From the outside, it appeared to be nothing more than a nondescript gray concrete structure with a simple, almost forgettable sign, But Martin knew, hidden behind those unassuming walls was the proof they needed, evidence of the nightmare that had haunted him for over 2 decades. He adjusted his coat, inhaled a deep breath that felt sharp against the cold night air. Ruby unzipped her toolkit, her fingers dancing over the cool metal of lockpicks, a small flashlight, and a slender knife. "Let's go," Ruby said, her voice low but resolute. Together, they crossed the dark, deserted lot, their footsteps echoing softly against the cracked pavement. They reached the side door Ruby had identified during her previous reconnaissance. Her fingers moved deftly, her eyes narrowed in concentration as she worked the lock with practiced precision. After a few tense moments, the lock clicked open, the door creaking softly on its hinges as it revealed the darkness within. Inside, the office was shrouded in an oppressive silence, broken only by the faint glow of a computer screen in sleep mode, casting a ghostly light across the space. Ruby took the lead, guiding Martin down a narrow hallway, both of them alert to the faintest sound, a creak of the floor, the whisper of movement, anything that might betray an unexpected presence. At the end of the corridor stood the records room, its heavy metal door securely locked. Ruby knelt down, her hands steady as she inserted her tools into the lock, her fingers moving with the precision of a concert pianist performing a delicate solo. "Just a few more seconds," she murmured, her voice barely audible above the rapid thumping of Martin's heart, which echoed like war drums in his chest. As he stood guard, memories of Elias filled his mind, his son's bright eyes, his laughter, his dreams. Finally, the lock clicked open. They slipped inside, enveloped by the scent of old paper and dust that hung thick in the air. Ruby scanned the room and found a safe concealed behind a nondescript painting. With practiced ease, she inserted her tools and unlocked it, the door creaking open to reveal stacks of files and records, their edges yellowed with age. "We've got it," Ruby whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of relief and adrenaline. She quickly scanned the papers, payment records, copies of contracts, and a series of cash transactions traced to the mysterious A. Whitman Fund. "This is the evidence," Martin murmured, his voice low but firm, his eyes shining in the flashlight's beam. Suddenly, the distant growl of an engine shattered the quiet. Headlights swept across the windows, casting elongated shadows on the walls. Martin's pulse quickened as he peered through the blinds. His heart sank. "It's Marshall," he whispered, dread pooling in his stomach. "Damn it," Ruby hissed, hastily stuffing the files into her coat. The front door burst open with a bang, and Marshall strode in, gun drawn, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "Freeze! What the hell are you two doing here?" he barked, his voice thick with barely concealed panic. Martin instinctively stepped in front of Ruby, his voice quivering but resolute. "We're just looking for the truth," he said hoarsely. "You're covering for your brother, aren't you?" Marshall's sneer twisted his face into something grotesque, but a flicker of fear danced in his eyes. "You don't know who you're dealing with. Turn around and go home before it's too late," he growled. Ruby, her hand trembling only slightly, activated her phone's voice recorder. Her voice cut through the tension like a blade. "So you're admitting it?" Marshall froze, his lips tightening into a thin line, his eyes darkening. "I'm just protecting this town from troublemakers like you," he spat. Martin took a step forward, his voice strained but defiant. "And who's protecting the children who vanished?" Marshall didn't answer. Instead, he turned sharply on his heel and stormed out, leaving Martin and Ruby gripping the precious evidence. They didn't linger. Quietly, they slipped out of the office, the cold night air searing their lungs as they hurried across the parking lot. The darkness seemed heavier, more oppressive, as if the town itself was holding its breath. Their footsteps echoed too loudly on the empty streets, but there was no time to hesitate. Inside the car, Ruby's hands trembled slightly as she gripped the steering wheel. "We've crossed the red line," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "From now on, there's no going back." Martin exhaled a shuddering breath, his mind awash with memories of Elias, his laughter, his dreams, the morning of his disappearance. "I never intended to turn back," he said, his voice low but resolute. Ruby pulled out of the lot, headlights slicing through the thick night. She stopped at a secluded corner, switched on the car's interior light, and pulled the retrieved documents from her coat. Under the pale glow, they pored over the papers. "Payment records from Trans Mountain Logistics," Ruby read, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. "Consistent cash transfers to Mexico, international calls logged, and this, the A. Whitman Fund." Martin's pulse quickened, a fire of fury lighting in his chest. "This is it. This is the proof," he said, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and relief. Ruby nodded grimly. "But we've only scratched the surface. A. Whitman is the key. She knows what happened." Martin clenched his fists. "We have to find A. Whitman before they silence her." Ruby quickly dialed her hacker contact. "Any updates from Grayson?" she asked urgently. After a pause, her face tightened, determination flashing in her eyes. "A. Whitman is Anna Whitman. She lived in Grayson, then disappeared in 1999. We believe she's now hiding near the Mexico border." Martin's breath caught in his throat. "We need to find her immediately," he said with fierce determination. Ruby nodded, her jaw set. "It won't be easy. They've wiped her trail clean. But if we find her first, this will change everything." Martin's eyes hardened, steeled with resolve. From this moment forward, he knew every step he and Ruby took would bring them deeper into danger. But he had already lost too much to turn back now. The hacker's message to Ruby contained just a few terse lines. "Anna Whitman, hiding near the Mexico border. Location confirmed." Ruby handed the phone to Martin, her heartbeat echoing in her ears, matching the rapid pulse in her chest. "Let's go," Martin said firmly, his voice steady, his eyes reflecting an unwavering resolve that had not dimmed over the years. Without hesitation, they loaded their supplies into the car and set off into the dense night. The small town of Grayson disappeared behind them as they drove down darkened highways cloaked in thick, heavy fog. The car's headlights cut narrow beams through the darkness, the rain on the windshield shimmering like silver threads in the moonlight. Inside the car, silence reigned except for the rhythmic sound of the windshield wipers and their synchronized, tense breathing. "Are you sure about this?" Ruby asked softly, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly, her voice trembling slightly under the weight of their decision. Martin stared out at the wet, glistening road ahead, his hand clutching the old photo of Elias so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "I have to do this," he whispered hoarsely, his voice carrying a quiet yet fierce determination. "For Elias, for all the children who vanished without a trace." They stopped briefly at an abandoned gas station to refuel and check their supplies. The derelict pumps stood like silent sentinels under the flickering lights, casting eerie shadows on the cracked pavement. Ruby made a quick call to the hacker, requesting additional support in case something went wrong. Martin, meanwhile, meticulously flipped through the thick file of documents they had brought with them, his gaze pausing at the bold letters spelling out A. Whitman. Memories of Elias, his laughter, his excitement about the school trip flashed through Martin's mind, fueling his determination. As dawn's first light crept across the horizon, their car rumbled into the outskirts of the small village where Anna was rumored to be hiding. The village appeared ghostly under the pale morning glow. Low wooden shacks, dirt roads slick with mud, and thin trails of smoke rising from chimneys. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and wood smoke. They parked the car a distance away from the designated house, a small wooden structure partially obscured by overgrown shrubs. Martin exited the car first, his every step cautious, his eyes scanning the surroundings for any signs of danger. Ruby followed closely, her body tense, her gaze darting between the house and the distant tree line. They approached the door, Martin's hand trembling slightly as he knocked. The sound echoed through the quiet morning air, punctuated only by the distant caw of crows. There was no immediate response. Martin waited a few minutes, his heart sinking. Finally, he slipped the photo of Elias and the letter from Ruth into the crack of the door, along with a simple message. "I'm just a father seeking the truth about what happened." As the minutes stretched, the light of the rising sun turned the sky a gentle amber. Just as they were about to turn away in resignation, the door creaked open. A woman appeared, thin, her skin pale and sallow, her eyes sunken and wary. She looked like a ghost pulled from a forgotten past. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice low and cracked, as if she hadn't spoken to another soul in years. Martin met her gaze with quiet strength. "Are you Anna Whitman? We're from Colorado. We need to ask you some questions." Anna's eyes widened, fear flickering behind them. She instinctively tried to close the door, but Ruby was quicker, her hand gently yet firmly pressing against the frame. "Please," Ruby said softly but urgently. "Just listen. If you still want us to leave afterward, we will." Anna hesitated, her body trembling, the battle between fear and guilt evident in her stance. Finally, with a shaky breath, she stepped aside, allowing them inside. The interior of the house was dimly lit, dust motes dancing in the thin shafts of light streaming through cracked blinds. The air smelled of mildew and old wood. Anna perched on the edge of a fragile-looking chair, her hands shaking as she fidgeted with the hem of her worn dress. Martin and Ruby sat across from her, their faces composed, their eyes filled with both determination and empathy. Ruby broke the silence first, her voice low but steady. "My name is Ruby, and this is Martin. He's the father of Elias, one of the children who disappeared in Colorado 22 years ago. We've finally found a lead. We know that you're listed as the recipient of financial transactions from Trans Mountain Logistics, a company run by Kevin Marshall, the sheriff's brother. Surely you know something. Please, Anna." Anna's face crumpled as tears welled in her tired eyes. She clutched her head in her hands, shaking it desperately. "I don't know anything. It's all a misunderstanding. I wasn't involved in the disappearances." Ruby stepped closer, her voice firm, her presence commanding yet compassionate. "Anna, we have evidence. Financial records, witness statements. We know the pieces fit together. You know what happened." Anna trembled violently, her voice cracking with suppressed anguish. "No, I can't. I don't know." Martin slowly reached into his coat pocket and pulled out Ruth's delicate necklace. He held it out, the small trinket glinting faintly in the dim light. His voice broke, raw with emotion. "I know this is hard, but we lost Elias. Suddenly, inexplicably. My wife couldn't survive the grief. And all the other families, they've lived in agony for over 2 decades. You might be the only hope left to bring light to this nightmare. Please, Anna, don't let this pain continue forever." Anna's trembling hands hovered over the necklace. Her breath hitched as her tear-filled eyes locked onto the photo of Elias, a young boy smiling innocently, forever frozen in time. Her shoulders slumped, her resolve shattered. With a deep, shuddering sigh, she whispered, "Come in. I'll tell you everything." The room was cloaked in darkness, with only the faint, flickering glow of an oil lamp casting long shadows on the worn wooden walls. A cold wind whispered through the cracks in the window, causing the small flame to dance nervously. Anna sat opposite Martin and Ruby, her hands clenched tightly together, nails digging into her skin. Her voice trembled, almost breaking. "I don't know where to begin," Ruby, her tone calm and patient like that of an older sister offering comfort, gently said, "Start from when you escaped." Anna closed her eyes, drew in a long, shaky breath, as if summoning every ounce of courage she had gathered over 2 decades, then spoke slowly. "When I woke up from the drugged stupor on the bus, I found myself and my classmates trapped inside a rotting warehouse. Outside, the wind howled, and insects chirped incessantly. The windows were boarded shut with decaying wood, allowing faint light to sneak through the cracks. Hank Ramirez told us this was a safe stop, but his eyes were cold, ruthless. I overheard him and another man calling the children cargo, bargaining over numbers and prices, as if trading livestock." Martin clenched his fists, his nails digging so deeply into his palms that they drew blood. His lips quivered. Ruby pressed urgently, her voice sharp like a blade. "Then what happened?" Anna's voice cracked, thick with emotion. "One night, when they were drunk, I saw my chance to escape. I squeezed through a narrow gap at the back of the warehouse, scraping my skin raw, bleeding from cuts. I ran through the forest all night, my legs burning and trembling, until I reached a small police station. I thought I'd be saved. But then, a powerful man came. He wore an expensive suit, a strong scent of cologne, and a fake smile. He told me to stay silent if I didn't want to die. He said my parents had killed themselves because of me, that I had no one left. He brought me here, forced me to sign illicit financial documents, and turned me into a silent pawn to cover up his crimes. I lived as a shadow for 2 decades, too afraid to speak, too afraid to dream of freedom." Ruby tightened her grip on her phone, her eyes ablaze with fury. "Who was this man?" Anna turned to Martin, tears streaming down her cheeks, her voice breaking like a long-withheld confession. "Frank Kessler, the principal of Red Meadow School." Martin froze, his entire body stiffening as though struck by lightning. He sprang to his feet, stepping back several paces, his face pale, his lips pressed tightly together as he struggled to contain the surge of anger and pain rising within him. For a moment, the room seemed to freeze, filled only with heavy breathing and the crackling of the oil lamp's flame. Anna sobbed, her voice choking. "I've kept silent for too long, but now, if you're willing to listen, I'll tell everything." The air in the room grew tense. Martin stood motionless, his eyes wide open, his breath coming in rapid bursts. Ruby placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, sensing the tremors of anguish shaking his frame. Anna bowed her head, her hands intertwined on the old wooden table, her voice barely a whisper, like a prayer. I can't stay silent anymore," her tears falling, each one soaking into the weathered wood. Martin stepped forward, his voice hoarse, each word slicing through the air. "Tell me everything, every detail. no matter how small. Anna inhaled deeply, her lips trembling, and began to recount, each word like a dagger slicing into old wounds. Frank Kessler. He was the one who sold the field trip information to the trafficking ring. He was drowning in gambling debts, owing sums so large he saw no way out. They forced him, either sell the information or lose everything. At first, Frank thought it was just an easy way to save himself. He didn't realize they would take the entire class. Martin staggered, leaning against the wall for support, his breath shallow and rapid, his face turning ashen, as if Anna's words were blades cutting deep into his soul. Ruby listened intently, quickly scribbling down each detail as though afraid to lose even a fragment of the puzzle. Anna's voice cracked, her sobs raw. I overheard Frank and the trafficker's conversation. They discussed the bus route, the departure time, the student list. Cash payments were made through anonymous accounts. Everything spiraled out of control when Hank Ramirez, the assistant driver, was killed to cover the tracks. Frank panicked, tried to erase evidence, staged the scene to pin everything on Hank and Mr. Reed. Martin collapsed into a chair, burying his face in his hands, sobs breaking through the silence of the room. Ruby gripped his shoulder firmly, her voice resolute, each word cutting clear through the grief. We have to expose the truth, for Elias, for all the other children. Let's report this to the FBI first thing in the morning. We cannot let the truth stay buried forever. Anna nodded, her eyes red but glistening with a rare determination. I'll testify. I won't cower anymore. I can't let other children suffer the same fate as I did. Immediately after the tense and shocking revelation from Anna, Martin, Ruby, and she quickly left the small, secluded village near the Mexico border. The night sky was pitch black, with swirling dark clouds and strong winds whipping up dust storms. Ruby drove at high speed, but maintained a firm grip on the wheel, the headlights slicing through the dense darkness, illuminating the narrow, bumpy dirt road ahead. No one in the car spoke a word. Only the roar of the engine and the rhythmic tapping of the wipers on the windshield, now covered with a layer of dust, filled the silence. Anna sat huddled in the back seat, clutching her bag tightly, her heart pounding, eyes wide and anxious as she constantly glanced out the window, fearing that at any moment pursuers would appear. Martin held his phone tightly, eyes tense as he stared at the weak signal bars. "We need to hurry," he murmured, his voice hoarse, breath heavy. "I have a bad feeling. They won't let us go." Just then, from the rearview mirror, Ruby caught sight of blinding headlights flashing from afar. A black SUV shot out from the shadows, closing in on them. "Damn it! They're coming!" Ruby cursed, her voice a mix of fear and anger. The SUV accelerated, closing the gap. A gunshot rang out, a bullet piercing the vehicle's side, shattering the window. Anna screamed, and Martin instinctively turned to shield her. Ruby swerved, taking the car down a bumpy dirt road, the wheels bouncing over potholes and gravel. "We can't let them get Anna," Martin growled, voice laced with determination and anger. The SUV kept pace, its headlights blindingly bright as they raked over the car's interior like a sharp blade. Ruby, sweating, gripped the wheel tightly, maneuvering through sharp turns. Another shot rang out, shattering the rear window, shards scattering everywhere. Martin leaned out the rear window and threw an oil can onto the road. The oil spread across the surface, causing the SUV to skid out of control and crash into a roadside tree. The crash echoed ominously, dust billowing into the air. "Go! Hurry!" Martin shouted. Ruby slammed the accelerator, the car rocketing forward through the swirling dust. But before they could catch their breath, they were stopped by a police car blocking the road. At first, Martin and Ruby thought it was a routine checkpoint, but to their shock, Sheriff Marshall emerged, flanked by several burly men with cold, hard faces. He stood in the middle of the road, his hand on his belt, eyes cold, voice menacing. "What do you think you're doing? Escorting our cargo? Anna?" Martin stepped forward, eyes steely, voice low but fierce. "Don't you dare threaten us. We'll expose Frank Kessler. You won't stop us." Marshall smirked, but a flicker of fear crossed his face. Instantly, his masked men drew guns, aiming directly at the trio. "Hand over Anna, and I'll let you walk away unharmed. Otherwise, don't say I didn't warn you." Ruby and Anna both turned to Martin, their eyes wide with confusion. Martin hesitated for a heartbeat, but quickly regained composure, his voice firm. "If I hand over Anna, will you let us go?" Marshall sneered, his face twisted with malice. "Yes, give her up and walk away." Martin clenched his fists, then slowly turned to Anna, his gaze resolute, but filled with unspoken meaning. "Anna, go with him. We can't protect you anymore." Anna was stunned, her eyes welling up, but she stepped forward hesitantly. As she took 2 steps, Martin suddenly pulled her back, his voice a harsh whisper. "Wait. Before she goes, your men need to lower their weapons, and I need clear space for her to move. Who guarantees you won't shoot us afterward?" Marshall signaled, his men reluctantly lowering their guns, creating a clear path. Ruby silently slipped back into the driver's seat, holding her breath. Martin whispered something into Anna's ear before releasing her. Anna trembled as she moved toward Marshall, tears streaming down her face as memories from 22 years ago flooded back. At that precise moment, Ruby started the engine. Martin yanked Anna back and slammed the door shut. "Get in!" he shouted. Ruby floored the accelerator, the car speeding away, leaving Marshall's stunned expression and curses trailing behind them. Gunfire erupted, bullets tearing through the air, smashing into the car. The chase turned into a desperate race. Ruby's car couldn't match the speed of the pursuing police vehicle. Side windows shattered. A bullet struck Anna in the shoulder, sending her collapsing onto the seat, blood soaking her clothes. Martin panicked, cradling her, his voice a desperate cry. Just when it seemed all was lost, an SUV coming from the opposite direction crashed head-on into the police vehicle, the impact thundering like an explosion. Dust and smoke filled the air. Marshall staggered from his car, blood trickling from his forehead. Martin dashed out, lifting Anna from the car, shouting, "She has the evidence on the Red Meadow disappearance! Protect her now! We need to get to a hospital!" From the SUV, 3 FBI agents emerged, weapons drawn, quickly subduing Marshall and his men. Ruby rushed to Martin's side, her eyes filled with concern. The entire group was escorted straight to FBI headquarters, where at last the faint light of justice began to break through the long, dark night. Upon arriving at the hospital, Anna was rushed into emergency surgery, her face pale and lips trembling from the gunshot wound to her left shoulder. Blood soaked her clothes, and the doctors worked frantically to stop the bleeding. Martin and Ruby paced the corridor outside the operating room, their faces etched with worry and guilt. "We shouldn't have taken such a risk," Ruby murmured, her voice quivering with regret. Martin clenched his fists, his eyes red-rimmed. "I won't forgive myself if anything happens to her," he whispered. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. Every passing second felt like an eternity. At last, Michael, the FBI agent with a stern expression, emerged from the operating room. He removed his mask and delivered the news they had been praying for. Anna is out of danger. The doctors say she'll recover if given proper care. However, we need her testimony immediately, and she will be placed into the witness protection program. The trafficking ring won't stop. They'll do whatever it takes to silence her. Michael's gaze locked onto Martin and Ruby, his voice unwavering. We'll increase security to ensure her safety. As for you two, please follow my colleagues to FBI headquarters. Turn over all the evidence you've gathered. We're reopening this case today. Martin exhaled heavily, his shoulders easing as if a massive weight had lifted. He looked at Ruby, his eyes brimming with gratitude and renewed determination. They both nodded and followed the agents, leaving behind the image of Anna being attended to in the emergency room. Martin whispered to himself, "Elias, I'll make sure you and your friends are never forgotten." The following morning, Frank Kessler's arrest unfolded beneath the blinding flashes of cameras and the shouts of a furious crowd. Victims and their families gathered outside the police station, their eyes fixed on every trembling step Frank took. The man, once revered as a model principal, was now a broken shell. His hands were cuffed tightly behind his back, his face pale, and his eyes vacant. News of the takedown of the cross-border trafficking ring spread across Grayson and throughout Colorado, illuminating the once shadowy truth. In the interrogation room, Martin faced Frank across a thick pane of glass. His gaze was icy as he spoke, his voice steady, yet seething with anger. "You ask me why I'm here. I'm not here as your son. I'm here as the father of Elias, the poor boy who vanished 22 years ago." Frank's face twisted in shock, his lips trembling. Elias was my grandson?" He seemed thunderstruck, his entire body shuddering as the realization set in. Martin stepped closer, his voice raw but resolute. "You don't deserve to call me your son. You abandoned me after my mother died, and then you abandoned Elias. You chose silence to protect yourself, trampling on the truth and on the trust of everyone. Do you have any idea of the price we all paid?" Frank collapsed into the chair, tears streaming down his wrinkled face. He whispered hoarsely, "I was cornered. They threatened me. I didn't know what else to do." Martin clenched his fists, his voice breaking with fury. "That's your excuse. You betrayed not only those children, but your own family. You turned Elias and his classmates into victims just to save yourself. There's no justification for your crimes, Frank Kessler." Frank looked up at Martin, his eyes flooded with desperation. "Please, son, forgive me." Martin's laugh was bitter, his gaze filled with scorn and pain. "Forgive you? You don't deserve it. From the moment you abandoned me to build a new family after my mother's death, I ceased being your son. Now, spend the rest of your life drowning in your regret." Frank crumpled onto the table, sobbing. Ruby entered the room, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Frank Kessler, you'll pay for what you've done. No one escapes justice." Camera flashes exploded outside the interrogation room as Frank was led away in handcuffs. Martin and Ruby stood side by side, their expressions resolute. They knew this was only the beginning, the first step in unearthing the full truth behind the tragedy that had haunted them for so long. Frank Kessler was led out of the FBI headquarters in handcuffs, the flashes from reporters' cameras illuminating the moment when the once respected principal was now exposed as a criminal. Shouts and murmurs from the crowd surged like waves against the betrayer. Martin and Ruby stood silently outside, their gazes filled with resolve and deep, unspoken sorrow. Beside them, Anna, her face pale, but her eyes resolute, was escorted into the armored vehicle for witness protection. The door slammed shut, sealing the painful past behind it. Martin couldn't take his eyes off Frank's receding figure. Echoes of confessions, tears of remorse, and desperate pleas for forgiveness reverberated in his mind. But inside, he felt only a deep, empty chasm. He whispered, his lips trembling, his hand tightly clutching his son's old photo. "Elias, I've kept my promise to you." Ruby stepped closer, her eyes meeting Martin's with understanding, her voice gentle yet firm. "This isn't the end. There's still so much to do to close this chapter, to let justice's light shine everywhere." Martin nodded, his eyes glinting with newfound determination. "I won't let any more children suffer the same fate as Elias." At the hospital, Anna, under the close protection of FBI agents, regained consciousness after surgery. Her face was pale, but her eyes sparkled with determination. When Ruby informed her that Frank Kessler had been arrested and the trafficking ring dismantled, Anna spoke softly, her voice trembling with gratitude. "Thank you. Without you and Martin, I would have remained trapped in fear, never daring to speak out." Ruby smiled gently, her eyes shining with hope. "Start a new life, Anna. We won't let you face this alone anymore." Martin stood quietly by Elias's grave, his hands clutching the old photo. He whispered, his voice hoarse, "I've found the truth, my son. You'll never be forgotten." A gentle breeze rustled the trees, sunlight softly breaking through, dispersing the gray mist that had long shrouded Martin's life. He knew this wasn't the end, but a beginning of truth, justice, and a fragile hope for those who had once been broken. Beneath the new light, Elias's image seemed to linger, smiling in Martin's memory. The day of Frank Kessler's trial unfolded in a courtroom brimming with tension, every seat filled. Camera flashes erupted like a storm, casting erratic light across the solemn faces gathered to witness history in the making. Reporters craned their necks, eager to capture every expression, every gesture. In the front row, Martin and Ruby sat side by side, their eyes locked on the graying man in handcuffs. Frank Kessler. The heavy air pressed down on the crowd. Even the sound of breathing seemed to vanish beneath the weight of expectation. Anna Whitman stepped onto the witness stand, her figure trembling, yet resolute. The courtroom lights cast a halo around her pale, drawn face, highlighting every crease of suffering etched by years of silence and fear. Her eyes, once haunted by shadows, now burned with unwavering determination. When she spoke, her voice, though delicate, rang clear and sharp, slicing through the murmurs like a blade. She recounted it all. The betrayal when Frank sold the children's trip details to settle his gambling debts, her terrifying escape, and the suffocating silence enforced by deadly threats. Each word fell with the weight of a gavel striking home, cracking the long-standing wall of deceit that had hidden the truth for 22 years. Frank's head dropped, his shoulders trembling with each syllable. A wave of whispers rippled across the room as emotions surged. Some pressed their hands to their mouths, others clutched tissues, eyes glistening with tears. The judge, face impassive yet attentive, gestured for the prosecution to present the findings. Agent Michael rose, his presence commanding yet gentle, his voice a resonant chord weaving through the courtroom's charged silence. "We have pursued this investigation with relentless resolve for nearly a year," he declared. In close cooperation with international intelligence agencies and specialized task forces, the FBI dismantled one of the most nefarious underground syndicates in modern history, a network masquerading as a humanitarian charity under the name the Evermore Foundation. Michael paused, scanning the sea of faces, each pair of eyes reflecting a mix of horror and disbelief. Behind a facade of aid and compassion, the Evermore Foundation orchestrated a monstrous operation of global child abductions and trafficking. They preyed upon impoverished and undocumented children, those who could vanish without leaving a trace, without anyone to raise an alarm. These children were transported to clandestine research facilities deep within the New Mexico desert, where they were subjected to illegal and unethical medical experiments. From unapproved vaccines and unauthorized drug trials to cutting-edge biotech implants, these experiments sought not only to push the limits of human endurance, but to unlock the secrets of longevity and disease resistance, all in service of extending the lives and fortunes of the ultra-wealthy. Michael's voice, though steady, wavered with the weight of what he described. During the raid 2 weeks ago, under the cover of night, our FBI task force encircled the facility. What we found defied even our worst fears. The sterile, cold rooms, once a living nightmare for over 200 children, echoed with cries and desperate pleas. We discovered children shackled to metal beds, their emaciated bodies curled into themselves, their vacant stares hollow and resigned. Some were too weak to stand and had to be carried from that chamber of horrors. He took a slow breath, steadying himself against the wave of emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. In the process, we uncovered further horrors. Hidden burial sites behind the facility revealed the remains of children who had perished during these heinous experiments. Among them, we believe, are those who vanished 22 years ago in the Red Meadow case. We have begun the painstaking process of collecting and analyzing DNA samples from these remains. Through forensic science and cross-referencing with missing persons files, we hope to provide long-awaited answers for the families who have suffered in silence for so long. Our mission is to restore dignity to these lost children, to bring them home to their loved ones, and to ensure that justice, however delayed, is delivered. Gasps and quiet sobs filled the courtroom. Parents of the missing gripped one another, their faces streaked with tears. Martin clutched the photograph of Elias, his hands trembling, his eyes alight with a fragile but tenacious hope. The remains recovered are now under careful forensic preservation, Michael continued, his voice gaining strength. Within the coming days, we will complete DNA analysis to confirm identities and repatriate the children to their families. This is not merely a legal duty. It is a solemn pledge to honor the innocent lives lost, to provide closure, and to let these families finally lay their children to rest with the dignity they deserve. Martin, tears welling, murmured, "Elias, I will bring you home. At last, I can bring you home." Ruby placed a firm yet gentle hand on his shoulder, her gaze unwavering. "We'll see this through to the end, Martin. No one will be forgotten." Anna, standing nearby, her voice cracking but infused with a newfound courage, declared, "We'll give each of them back their names. No one can forever hide the truth of these crimes." The courtroom held a collective breath before erupting into applause, not to celebrate the end of the trial, but to honor the courage of those who spoke, the lost lives now acknowledged, and the unwavering pursuit of justice that, no matter how arduous, would always illuminate the path home. Frank Kessler was led out of the FBI headquarters in handcuffs, his face pale and gaunt under the barrage of blinding camera flashes from dozens of reporters. The crowd outside roared with a mixture of anger, grief, and disbelief, their shouts mingling with the muffled sobs of those who had been victims or had lost loved ones. Frank's head hung low, his shoulders slumped under the unbearable weight of his guilt. His eyes were vacant, unable to meet the gaze of anyone in the crowd, as if trying to shrink into himself. Martin and Ruby stood silently on the sidelines, their eyes locked on Frank's trembling steps. Anna, her face pale yet illuminated with steely determination, was escorted by federal agents into a waiting witness protection vehicle. "We did it," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the cacophony. But Martin shook his head slightly, his voice low and raw. "Not yet. There's still something we have to do." News of the dismantled trafficking ring and the illegal experimentation network spread swiftly across Colorado and beyond, igniting public outrage. Hundreds of volunteers, forensic specialists, and federal agents worked tirelessly, combing through the clandestine burial sites hidden behind the secret research facility. That somber morning, under a sky thick with gray clouds, the FBI organized a formal handover of the recovered remains of the children from the Red Meadow case. Specialized transport trucks rolled silently along the narrow street leading to Grayson's funeral home. From these vehicles, small coffins, each draped in pristine white cloth, were gently carried down by solemn hands. Martin stood motionless amidst the gathered crowd, his hand clutching the old photograph of Elias. He watched as one family after another stepped forward to receive the tiny coffins of their lost children. Wails of grief echoed through the air, punctuated by the shattering sobs of parents, some collapsing under the weight of sorrow. One mother fell to her knees as she saw her daughter's coffin, her husband rushing to support her. Another father clung desperately to the small wooden box, his tears falling like a torrential downpour. When his turn came, Martin's legs trembled beneath him as he approached. Elias's coffin was placed before him, small and heartbreakingly silent. Martin bowed his head, his trembling hand softly brushing the white cloth before placing Elias's photograph gently atop the coffin. "I found you, my son," he whispered, his voice cracking with raw emotion. "You're no longer forgotten." Ruby stepped forward, her hand resting firmly yet tenderly on Martin's shoulder. Her eyes, steadfast and shining with unshed tears, met his. Anna stood nearby, her own eyes glistening with tears, but also reflecting a fierce, unbreakable resolve. Agent Michael ascended a small platform, his voice clear, yet tinged with gravity as it carried through the hush. "We extend our deepest condolences to the families of these victims. These innocent children endured unimaginable atrocities. But today, thanks to the courage of witnesses and the support of the community, they have been found, named, and returned home. This is not just the conclusion of a case, it marks the beginning of healing and justice." Martin embraced Elias's photograph tightly to his chest, his tears falling onto the white cloth covering his son's coffin. "I love you, Elias," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I kept my promise." Ruby placed a hand softly on the coffin, murmuring, "And no other child will be forgotten again. We'll continue this fight for Elias and every child." As the ceremony drew to a close, Martin, Ruby, and Anna quietly accompanied the procession of Elias and the other children to their final resting places. A gentle breeze stirred the air, carrying the scent of white flowers. Sunlight broke through the gray, washing over the streets of Grayson, chasing away the lingering shadows of the past. They stood together, a trio united by unshakable resolve, knowing that no matter how deep the darkness, the light of truth would always illuminate the way, restoring justice and hope to those left behind. Later that afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with strokes of gold and crimson, Martin, Ruby, and Anna sat quietly together in Ruby's small living room. The fading light filtered through the window, casting long shadows on the walls. On the table before them lay thick case files, maps marked with symbols, and fragments of leads yet to be fully uncovered. Ruby's voice, firm and resolute, broke the silence. "We can't stop here," she said, her eyes shining with determination. "This ring was just the tip of the iceberg. There are other branches, other monsters still lurking out there. We need to expose them all." Anna nodded, her expression more resolute than ever. She pulled a small notebook from her bag, its pages filled with hastily scrawled notes, fragments of memories, whispers she'd overheard during her years in captivity. "I remember some names, some places," she said softly. "I'm not sure how much they'll help, but they're a starting point." Martin lifted his head and looked forward, his voice deep and resonant, echoing like a message meant for everyone. "Life will never stop testing us, but as long as there is faith, even the faintest spark of it, we will find the strength to keep moving forward. Darkness may endure, but the light of truth, courage, and unwavering faith will always guide us toward justice and reconciliation. No one has to fight alone, and no one, no child, will be forgotten." Ruby and Anna nodded, fully aware that the road ahead would be riddled with obstacles. But now, they had each other. They had drawn strength from all that had been lost, from the indelible memories etched into their hearts, and from the faint glow of justice that had finally been ignited after so many years of darkness. The morning sun broke through, scattering the mist over the fields. In the sky, puffs of white clouds floated gently, like messages from the souls of the children who had finally found peace. In that light, Martin, Ruby, and Anna continued on their way, without looking back, carrying with them an unquenchable hope. Goodness will always triumph over darkness. Truth will always come to light. And courage and faith will lead the way to reconciliation and hope, no matter how long the journey may be.